So when you think about film theory, your mind probably jumps to modern, complex ideas, right? But here's the thing. The biggest questions we ask about movies, what's real? What's art? What's beautiful? It turns out those are ancient debates. They started thousands of years before a camera ever even existed.
And it really all kicks off with this one powerful idea. Just think about it for a second. You're sitting in a dark room, you're facing forward, and you're watching flickering images of light projected on a wall. Now, are you in a movie theater, or are you in Plato's cave watching shadows that you're convinced are reality? That connection, right there, is the key to this whole thing. And look, this is not just some clever comparison I'm making up. It's a connection that film theorists have been pointing to from the very, very beginning. They immediately saw the cinema as a kind of modern-day version of that ancient cave, a place that messes with our perception of what's real and what's just a shadow on the wall. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with that core idea, the cave and the cinema. Then we'll dive into the ancient questions of art itself. After that, we'll ask what makes film as a medium so unique, how it organizes reality with things like genre, and finally, we'll look at the really big picture: cinema, culture, and power. So let's start with that foundational metaphor we just talked about, the cave and the cinema. That connection between film and philosophy really opens up some much bigger conversations. Pretty much every debate we have about art, and that includes film, it really starts in this field of philosophy called aesthetics. And this is where all the big, messy, and fascinating questions live.
So, aesthetics, what is it? Well, at its core, it's the philosophy of art and beauty. The word itself is pretty cool. It comes from the Greek word aesthesis, which means perception or sensation. So it's not just about what looks pretty, it's about how we perceive and judge the artistic world with our senses. And this, of course, leads to some really heavy questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. Like, what even is beauty? Is it some universal truth, or is it just totally subjective? And here's the big one. Can a work of art be considered great if its message is, well, morally awful? Can you or should you separate the art from the politics?
I mean, this dilemma is captured perfectly by the critic Susan Sontag. She looked at Leni Riefenstahl's Nazi propaganda film Triumph of the Will. On one hand, you can analyze it as a technical masterpiece. The camera work, the editing, the sheer scale of it, it's brilliant filmmaking. But on the other hand, its purpose is horrifying. So how do you deal with that? Film theory forces us to stare that tension right in the face. So, if film is an art form that has to grapple with all these huge questions, what makes it different from other art forms? Well, this brings us to a concept called medium specificity, which is really just a fancy way of asking, what makes film, film?
Medium specificity, it sounds academic, I know, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It just argues that every art form, painting, literature, music, has its own unique DNA. It has certain things it can do better than any other medium. So the theory isn't just about what film can do, but what it should do to be true to its own unique nature.
Which leads to the big question, what is film's unique superpower? What can it pull off that a novel or a play or a painting just can't? Well, a great way to think about it is to compare it to literature. A novel, usually, is the product of one person's mind. It uses words on a page to give us super precise access to a character's inner thoughts. Film, though, it's almost always this massive, collaborative effort. And it is fundamentally audiovisual. It communicates through this complex dance of moving images and sound.
This really gets at the sheer density of what a movie is. You know that old saying, an image is worth 1,000 words? For film, that doesn't even come close. A movie is a relentless flood of images, 24 of them every second, all interacting with dialogue, sound effects, music. It's this overwhelming sensory experience. And that, right there, is its unique power. Okay, so now that we have a sense of what makes film special, how do we start to analyze the ways it actually organizes and presents reality to us? Two of the most important tools for that are genre and the whole concept of realism. The word genre is pretty straightforward. It just comes from the Latin word for kind or sort. It's just a way of putting films into categories based on stuff they have in common, their themes, their styles, and this idea goes way back to Aristotle's Poetics when he first tried sorting literature into things like tragedy and comedy. And of course, cinema developed its own rich world of genres. When you sit down to watch a Western, or a musical, or a film noir, you already have a sense of the rules of that world. Every genre comes with its own playbook, its own set of expectations and visual cues that help us make sense of the story.
But this brings up another one of those classic debates. Are genres just convenient labels that Hollywood studios came up with to sell us tickets? Or are they tapping into something way deeper, something timeless about the kinds of stories we humans just need to tell? Is the Western just a marketing category, or is it an essential form of modern myth?
This debate ties directly into the bigger question of realism, which, believe it or not, brings us right back to our old friend Plato. See, for Plato, the truest reality isn't the physical world we see around us. It's the perfect, abstract idea of things. The perfect form of a chair is more real to him than any actual physical chair you could sit on.
But then, Plato's student, Aristotle, comes along and completely disagrees. For him, reality is what's right here, right in front of us, the material world we can see and touch. The essence of a chair only exists within all the actual chairs in the world. And this ancient philosophical fight between reality as an idea and reality as a physical thing is perfectly mirrored in film's constant push and pull between stylized genre movies and gritty, realistic cinema.
And finally, we absolutely have to remember that film wasn't born in a vacuum. To really truly understand it, we have to look at the specific historical moment it was created in and the structures of power that were shaping the world at that time.
Just look at the timing here. It's actually kind of stunning. The birth of cinema in the 1890s happened at the exact same moment as the absolute peak of global imperialism. Just as European powers were carving up Africa, just as the United States was finalizing its expansion across the continent, this incredibly powerful new storytelling technology appears. That is not a coincidence.
And what that means is that the first countries to master this new medium, we're talking Britain, France, the United States, were also the world's dominant colonial powers. So naturally, their films often reflected their worldview. They told stories that justified their expansion, always from the colonizer's perspective. The camera became a tool not just for art, but for power.
And all of this brings us right back to today. Because these ancient questions about perception, reality, art, and power, they are more relevant now than ever before. I mean, we live in an age of convincing deepfakes, of AI-generated video, of immersive virtual reality. That line between the shadows on the cave wall and the world outside has become profoundly, incredibly blurry. So what does it even mean for a film to be real when our entire reality is starting to feel like a simulation? That's definitely something to think about.